Edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 8th, 2023, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. As we do each week, we take our stories for the Midweek Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Monday called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And that newsletter is free of charge to any who wish to subscribe, either via email, dropping the link to the subscribe page from our website, SMIEconsulting.org/subscribe. Also, the most recent edition of this week's March 6th, all SMIE News Fit to Share. And also the LinkedIn version of our newsletter that you can also subscribe to. Between the two of those newsletters versions, we have over 1,000 subscribers, so we really appreciate all of those of you who have made that newsletter part of your regular weekly international edification. So we take the themes from some of those news stories that we see develop each week, and we focus on 3 of those here on the Midweek Roundup and give a little bit more in-depth look into how those particular questions can frame how we approach international education in our jobs at U.S. institutions and around the world. So, as we do each week, we appreciate those of you who watch live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, our social media feeds for SMIE Consulting, and also those of you who listen to the audio-only podcast version of this roundup that you can get through any of your favorite podcast providers. So let's get right into our first question of the day, and this is a hot topic on many college campuses this last couple of weeks, and that is, what was the Department of Education thinking with its recent guidance on TPS, third-party servicers, they call them, based overseas or with foreign ownership? So we'll get to the gist of that question in just a minute, but we'll share first a good summary article of what's happened in this with regard to this, and that's related to, it's an ICEF Monitor article from March 1st that shares the title, New U.S. Department of Education Guidance Alarming for EdTech and Recruitment Providers. Now, many of us on college campuses, if we have the ears of our senior leadership, this is something that you certainly want to elevate up to the chain to government relations folks on your college campuses so that they're aware of the potential implications if this guidance is let to stand and what that might mean, not just for international education, but other parts of the university life that may be impacted by this ruling or this guidance. Now, here's what the gist of the guidance is, and I've just been putting a brief together for senior leadership for our government relations folks on campus that kind of summarizes this. But the gist of the letter of the guidance that most commentators have suggested that this is a quick fix. It's just poorly worded, and not unlike what happened in the summer of 2021 when Department of Defense bill was passed that had wording that was overly generic related to commission-based payments that impacted recruitment agents, educational recruitment agents potentially, not being that institutions who receive Department of Defense funds could not also be using commission-based agents. And that had language that was particularly poorly written that did not exclude international-based educational agents recruiting students for U.S. institutions. So this is similar to that, but what we're talking about here with regard to the language in the Department of Education guidance, it says specifically referring to Title IV programs. So that the department has reviewed numerous contractual agreements. Here's the actual wording of the letter. Department has reviewed numerous contractual arrangements between institutions and outside entities. These reviews have confirmed that most activities and functions performed by outside entities on behalf of an institution are intrinsically intertwined with the institution's administration of the Title IV programs, and thus the entities performing such activities are appropriate subjects to TPS requirements. Now, these are not TPS reports from the movie Office Space. These are third-party servicers. That's what the Department of Education calls TPS. In particular, the department is revising its guidance concerning the functions of student recruiting and retention, the provisions of software products and services involved in Title IV administration activities, and the provision of educational content and instruction. The department is aware that a large and growing industry has developed to provide one or more of these services as a means of transitioning academic programs into a distance education format and expanding enrollment. Companies providing such services are sometimes referred to as online program managers, OPMs. So the Title IV programs is, for those who aren't aware, is specifically referring to federal financial aid for post-secondary students. That's government money coming to institutions for federal financial aid. So that's almost exclusively for U.S. citizens, permanent residents, asylees, and residents of the Marshall Islands, I think, and American Samoa perhaps as well. But anyway, these classifications are specifically, Title IV specifically refers to financial aid, federal financial aid, which international students are not eligible for. So from an international education perspective, it seems to fall outside of what the Department of Education is really intending with this, that they're really concerned about these OPMs that are offering distance education formats, expanding enrollments, if these programs are owned by non-U.S. citizens or based overseas. So that's really the requirement or the particular concern of the Department of Education in trying to regulate this. So, and where those funds go for Title IV, it's if any of that money goes to should be. If any of that money goes to overseas TPS people, then that would fall afoul of this regulation. So the challenges from an international admissions, international education perspective is that the letter does specifically indicate that recruitment and application related activities are within its oversight scope, including, quote unquote, in the letter, interacting with prospective students for the purpose of recruiting or securing enrollment, basically performing what the function that agents perform. This includes, but is not limited to, providing prospective students with information on educational programs, application document requirements, deadlines, and the enrollment process. Assisting students with the completion of application enrollment processes. This includes offering admissions and enrollment counseling. So this obviously concerns international admissions folks who rely on agents to provide many of these services to prospective students overseas. Educational agents are almost exclusively overseas based. Some do operate in the United States but have offices overseas. So that is particularly of concern for international education. There are also potential implications for partnerships with universities, that partner universities overseas that would have potentially be receiving U.S. students who have federal financial aid to attend the study abroad program overseas. So there's, again, many potential areas of concern for international educators beyond just the diagnosis from that's specific to international education. There may, and I think the main target of these are OPMs related to that would be connected to a Title IV funding in any way, which most international education programs are not. Again, unless it's going to be that study abroad piece. So this is particularly concerning. It's hopefully going to be corrected. The fallout from this is that Department of Education, after a series of educational associations led by ACE, penned a letter that, as they usually do, they sort of serve as the umbrella whenever some of this new federal guidance or legislation comes out that is particularly opposed to parts of that higher education process. Or industry. So ACE sent a letter to Department of Ed outlining the areas of concern that this the Department of Ed has come back and said, okay, we're we're going to extend the comment period through the end of March, and then push back the guidance implementation until September. So that's had at least a positive immediate impact, that there's not rushing in with this guidance, which originally was going to go in place in the next month or so. That now will be pushed back to, at the minimum, to September. But hopefully will be made clearer. And that's basically what all the international ed associations, including NAFSA, AIRC, along with ACE, have asked Department of Ed for further clarification and guidance on where the boundaries are of this prohibition on funding connected to Title IV and OPMs or TPSs overseas. So that's a pretty big chunk, and a particularly alarming piece of news for international educators who are looking at these potential government regulations or guidance changes. So if you haven't already, this certainly would be something worthwhile considering on your own campuses, to at least alert government relation officials on campus to what the challenges of this new guidance would be for what you do in international education. Again, this could be for your use of educational agents. It could be impacting your ability to partner with universities overseas that might be receiving students who come on federal financial aid that allows them to attend those programs. It also impacts a wide range of what you can and can't do domestically too, but that's a whole other argument that our domestic colleagues or those that do online education at your institutions may be asking or looking to get clarification on as well. So we'll see what happens with this, but certainly it could be, if it turns out to be actually what they say it is supposed to be, and not as broad, not as perhaps an oversight or miscommunication or a poorly written guidance that shouldn't include international recruitment agents and such, and university partnerships. If it is actually meant to be broad and wide scope, then much of international education could be turned on its head by September. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully it's going to be quickly resolved after the March 30th deadline, maybe before, but certainly we'll keep you posted here on the Roundup as to what this might mean. I know putting together briefs for government relations officials at your institution is never a highlight of your day, but certainly something that you need to be prepared to do, and this might be one of those times when action is required sooner rather than later, just to make sure that your institution is aware of the potential implications of this guidance should it go through as is. So that's the first topic of the day. The next one is this time of year, as we get towards most of our institutions that are on July 1 fiscal years. We're getting towards the end of the moving into quarter four here in a few weeks for April, May, and June, and we are looking at how we're going to use the rest of our budgets and thinking about starting to prioritize what we were planning to do for the next fiscal year. I know I've gone through a similar exercise at UNLV recently, proposing my budget for the next year, what that would include in terms of recruitment areas, in terms of staffing, in terms of fairs and other things that we want to do, travel, conferences, memberships, all of that. So the question is around budget. Is what drives your international education budget decisions on campus? Now, this is a complex question, obviously, depending on where your office is housed, if it's within an admissions office, if we're talking about student recruitment budget and enrollment budget, or if we're standalone units, you might have your own funding mechanisms that are independent of an admissions office. If it's you got some in graduate school, some in undergraduate admissions in terms of recruitment, and there's no one home for that. You might be in a standalone International Student Scholar Services office that might have some minor recruitment related things. But the question is, what drives your international budget decisions on campus? So turning here to an article from our colleagues at intl, where they say budgeting should be an expression of your values as a campus. And they pose three essential questions that all campuses or all international ed folks should be saying what we need, what should drive our where we spend our money. And this is an important piece of the puzzle. So I really think that as the INTED article points out, is that what are these three essential budget questions? A framework for planning. That's a download that they have, INTED has available as well. And if you, what they boil it down to are three questions that you should be asking when you're making budget decisions. First up, where are the strongest opportunities for growth? What do you truly value? And are you performing at the level that produces desired results? So by answering those three questions for your institution, you may have, and the strongest opportunities for growth is in the recruitment side. What are the markets that you are the most likely to produce growth for your institution? And college market, or country markets, program markets, combination of those two, level of study, that type of thing. Having answers to those three questions, that question there. Then what do you truly value? And the value here is really where the rubber hits the road. What, as an institution, and let's just break it down to internationally, in international education at your institution, what do you truly value? Now, many of our campuses may have a more altruistic vision and be driven by this in an ideal world, that we bring international students in to enhance the experience for our domestic students, to share the greatness of our programs and experiences that students can have from other countries on our campus, and then take that home to their countries, to prepare students for a globally interconnected world by knowing people from different cultures and countries and languages and religions from all over the world on our campus, and through study abroad and whatever other means you're using. So if that's what you truly value, then your priorities and where you spend your money should align with that, in terms of you want students to come here, have positive experiences, interact with domestic students, be prepared for the career of their choice once they leave our campus and return home and become successful alumni for your institution, and hopefully ambassadors for your institution. So if that's what you truly value, your money should support those objectives, right? So that makes sense, clear enough. What happens if you truly value just numbers? Then where you spend your recruitment dollars is where you expect the most return on your investment, in terms of what's going to bring the most revenue into my institution, which market should I go into, or market should I go into to bring the most growth. And if that's what you're looking for, then that's there are different methodologies for going about achieving that. Because the first one, I'm giving the two extremes here. The first one I mentioned, if you're looking at this from the ideal vision of international education, it should be driven by the end product of what you're trying to get out. And for most of our campuses, we're not maybe all the way there. We're on a journey towards being that as an ideal way to conduct international education efforts on our campuses. We focus on those outcomes, and we realize those outcomes require us to provide services, not just promotional materials on the front end to bring students in, but the services to take care of the students while they're on campus, and those services in their last year of studies, or last period of time on our campus before they return home or go into the job market, that we're preparing them for that next step, that we're equipping them not only with the skills to be good in their career, but the skills that they need for life, for the research, the communication skills, the interview skills, the writing skills, all of those things that they will need to have to be successful in their chosen profession. But also how to get to that chosen profession, how to identify the right opportunities and companies that they can work for to get them where they need to be. So that we're on a journey towards that, because most of our campuses are not going to be full service prospect to successful alumni system where every dot is connected throughout that journey, so that through the enrollment and orientation and advising and programming and services and housing and all of those things that lead to students becoming successful graduates, we're not all there yet, are we? So we're on a path to that goal. But when you're showing what you truly value, if that's what's guiding your search, as opposed to where you spend your money, then the value piece will come in. Well, if you value that full-term experience, and that's where we want to be. We want to get to that point where we spend our money is going to reflect the services we need to have to allow us to get to that point, not only in the front end of the process while they're students and at the end of their journey as a student. So that's the ideal. Those that are driven, valued by revenue for the institution, bottom line, that's all we care about. We don't care where they come from. Then your motivations are all in on China, or in the past, all in China, or all in on India, all in on Saudi Arabia if you have the right programs, all in on Brazil, or whatever your best market would be. And then the rest they happen. But that's what really will trigger which path you go down, or some combination of those two, or variation on that theme, I should say. And the final question they ask is, and are you performing at the level that produces desired results? And part of the challenge here, again, is how are you measuring your success? And obviously, if you've been tracking where you spent your money this past year, what has that led to? For example, at UNLV, my first year since May last year has been spent elevating UNLV's profile amongst influencers. By influencers, I mean guidance counselors through International ACAC, through presence at international education conferences like NAFSA, like International ACAC, like AIRC, like AIEA, and NAFSA, of course. All of these conferences, and now going to API next week, meeting with the influencers that can help spread the word about who we are as an institution, let folks know that we're out there on the market, ready to work with them to bring qualified students into our programs. Also, part of that influencer network are the agents and Education USA officers and advisors around the world that on the agent side, we have a network now of 30 plus agents that we're working with to help drive student traffic to us. With Education USA, we're making them aware of our programs. We're doing outreach to them to connect for webinars. We're potentially using Education USA to help us identify potential partner universities in their countries that would be good fits for our university as we look to grow our international footprint. So for us, me tracking results for what I do is I don't handle directly the admissions part. There's graduate and undergraduate admissions teams that have been combined into one unit that have staff that do the actual admissions processing. My job is to get the word out, set up fairs that our folks can participate in, to recruit students for, to have them do virtual events, that type of thing that will help get us in front of as many students as we can. But my goal is setting the table so that the processes we set up and refine specifically for international students, the communication flow messaging that we work on to help improve the yield of students that we have coming into the application and inquiry process with us, to the enrollment services, the orientation, advising, pre-advising, pre-arrival programming we do, working with our OISS office to help refine that and to have basics in place that help take what we do on a service level to the next level for the students once they arrive, making that best first impression. So it's about numbers in the end, yes, but it's about the quality of the students that we're bringing, about the retention of those students once they're on campus, that they're getting the quality services we say we're promising, and by the end, in year 3, 4, 5, once we have cohorts graduating, have data that can better reflect our success in where they're going and what kinds of jobs they're getting, all of these things that are so vital to promoting where we are as an institution and who we want to be. So those are the 3 questions. Are you performing at the level? So make sure you have your ROI. You make sure you've got your data that supports the projects that you've been working on to drive enrollment, to drive applicants, whatever it might be. Having that data available to show your success year on year about how you're improving the numbers, if that's what the only goal is. So the question that they rightly ask here at the end. from the intl folks. Here's the thing, quote unquote, if you are not willing to fund something to get the results you want, then you don't value those desired results as much as the thing you do decide to fund. What went into that decision? All too often, institutional politics carries more weight than an evaluation of values and growth opportunities. Ouch, quote unquote. So these are the things for institutions to consider when they're making decisions. And if you have control over your own budget and budgeting requests, if you are prioritizing your decisions as to where you spend your money on those answers to those three questions, then you're probably going to be in good stead. And hopefully that's something you can share up the chain. Here's what our vision is. Here's why we're going the way we're going with this. Here's the data to back up why we're making the decisions we're making. So if you can do that effectively, then you're probably on a good path towards achieving your institutional goals that way, or your international education goals. So that's the second question of the day. For our final question, we'll take a quick fire look at some challenges that the UK is facing right now. What are the challenges facing UK international ed? For those that have been following the newsletter over the last 2-3 months since the Sunak government came into power, there's been a lot of kind of confusion on the international ed side as to where this government is in terms of priorities for international education. It's just sort of coming at the peak of the renaissance of UK higher ed for international education. They've seen huge record numbers returning, over 600,000 international students currently in the UK at British universities. That represents achieving a goal years ahead of schedule to reach that 600,000 mark. They've seen huge growth from China, huge growth from India, Nigeria, as they've seen explosions in the number of postgraduate degree programs that international students have been coming for, which in the UK terms are primarily one-year master's programs. And we know UK undergrad degrees are 3 years, their master's degrees mostly are 1, some are 2 years, and then doctoral programs are 3 to 5 years. But the master's programs are what has driven a lot of the recent growth in international education numbers, international student numbers in the UK. So they're at this all-time peak. But the challenges are this peak is coming at a time where, because the shift to online to postgraduate master's level degrees primarily, it's creating a lot of churn. Because the recruitment cycle is, these are students that are only going to be in the UK for 1 year on their campuses. So it's a limited year on year, you're churning over to those same students. So the only new ones you're getting in each year to these programs are going to be for 1 year, primarily for these master's students. So there's limited impact that those students financially will have on your campuses, but they're going for numbers at many schools right now. There was an article last week we shared, or about a webinar from the PI about the University of Hull and how they've just blown up their numbers, more than doubled in the last 3 years. So there's some real momentum that's been gathering over the last 3 years. Even during the pandemic, you saw UK numbers continue to go up after initial everyone had a bounce down in 2020, but UK numbers have shot up because of their smoother visa processing piece, not requiring the interview, having third parties who kind of run the majority of the visa processing. So it's sped up that process and left countries that do require interviews like the UK or like the US struggling to get students in because consulates and embassies weren't open during the pandemic. Now that they're reopening, it's becoming less of an issue, but still there's a backlog and all of these wonderful things that we have to face in the US. UK didn't. So we're seeing what's happening here with the UK. So that's kind of painting the picture. What's happened with the Sunak government, their Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, came in and immediately said, we're going to be putting a cap on the number of students, postgraduate students that come into us who bring dependents, because there was apparently this huge spike in international students that were bringing dependents with them who were coming from master's or doctoral programs. A huge spike, 30 to 60% spike, I think, of number of new people coming in. And those people were only allowed in because the students were coming for postgraduate degrees. The talk was on capping the numbers. There's talk of reducing the numbers. There's talk of allowing only high-value degree holders to bring in dependents. There was originally talk of only allowing students to go to particular universities and not low-value institutions. So there's been a lot of disquiet about that. We're also one of the knock-on effects of the UK's success with their recruitment is there's a huge housing shortages in the UK in many cities. Some institutions, even in Scotland, said don't come unless you've already got housing lined up, just because it's seriously that short on housing. And there was another article in our newsletter this week that cataloged the vacancy rates in most of Europe are less than 1 or 2% available housing for international students. So some serious challenges ahead for UK institutions that are looking to continue their strong path towards world domination in international student recruitment. So we'll keep our eyes on those challenges and how they materialize in terms of government policy, but be grateful we don't have that level of intervention yet on the U.S. side. But that's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. Wishing you the best for the rest of your travels. We're off to Vietnam and Thailand, where next week on March 15th, I'll be presenting live from the API conference in Bangkok. So until next time.